really excited to have Samantha Moran, Head of Customer Success at OpenEnvoy, joining us. We continue to talk about the people and the change management, and I think a big part of that digital transformation roadmap and journey is where we're going with our automation. And I think the biggest trend and that we're seeing across the board is that investment in AP automation for a magnitude of reasons. And so with me, Samantha and I are going to overview on what the benefits are long and short term from AP automation. What are the tangible versus intangible values that can be derived and brought back to the business, and really take a deep dive to see if you're not getting all of these opportunities leveraged across software and technology at your disposal, that you kind of look at your finance technology stack that you have and look at where it's going and how is this going to be part of the change, part of the new normal, and how is it going to support the business operations in the future. With that, Samantha, I do want to welcome you to CFO Select and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Maria. I appreciate it.
So, Samantha, I brought you here, and I know we have a few slides that we prepared, and there's a lot of trends that we're seeing in the industry. The first and foremost is AP automation is the hottest thing in town. I think there's that conversation and questions of, well, what is low code, no code versus RPA or some of the other automation paths that we can take. And I think part of it is understanding what your needs of the business are, how you can get the most out of the technology itself, and really understand those cost savings and tangible and intangible assets. So I'll just share a few stats off of SSO and analytics. Give me a second to see can you guys see the presentation? I'm
not seeing it yet on my end, Marie.
Oh, let me pull that up. Sorry about that. Leave it to technology when we're talking about technology.
Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Perfect. So great. So I think some of the trends that we're seeing across the board is, the cost per FTE is the cost per invoice and really the amount of accuracy that we're at. So SSO and Analytics did a study, and we found that only 47% of shared service and GBS are sitting at that 97% in accuracy, which means there's a ton of opportunity for growth across the business. And there's a lot of inefficiencies that we can pick on for all those that are sitting at that 53% margin.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with this, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of my background, I am the head of customer success at OpenEnvoy, a leading AP automation software. And so the reason that I think I have some good perspective here is I've worked with a wide array of customers who come to us usually much lower than that 97%. A lot of our customers are seeing, more like 70% accuracy or less. But the large enterprise customers that we're working with, like even 97%, when you get there, if you're 3% inaccurate on $1 billion, that's massive. That's a lot of money on the table. And so when we're talking to these customers and trying to help them, dive into their process, understand how they're going to transform it with OpenEnvoy, it's really critical that we kind of know where that initial benchmark is. And we dive into 2 layers of accuracy. So what this talks about, and there's kind of like that little info bubble on this slide of how this was measured. But we think about the accuracy of digitizing the invoices to begin with. So is it accurately pulling the invoice number, the amount due, the date, all of that information, the vendor information, their payment details? You have to start with accurate information. And a lot of technologies can't quite get it to 100%. And so that's where, we're so focused. And I think you need to have a high expectation that accuracy from the get-go on just digitizing that information needs to be at 100%. Because then the second layer is then, is it invoicing for the right amount? Are the charges and the line items appropriate per your contract, per any surcharges that should be included, things like that, to kind of address both of those layers with your AP automation journey.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, pointing to that accuracy, the next part of that is then cost, right? If you think about it from a manual perspective, there is so much that's happening on manual processes being anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 in terms of manual processes. And I think what we're trying to see is how do we reduce it from there? 1,000 to 1,500 is a lot. It is the average across manual, but with AP automation, what are some of those benefits and those wins that we can bring back to the business?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think either of us have control of the slides at the moment, but if
I know I'm
next one.
Give me one
I'll keep
second.
talking while you work on the technology.
Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, we're at 1,000 to 1,500, about 27%. There we go. Now we've got it. About 27% of businesses are getting to 1,000 to 1,500 invoices per FTE per month. If you think about the number of human man hours, the amount of brain power that's going in, if for every 1,000 to 1,500 invoices that are being processed a month by organization, a human needs to have that be their full-time job. So this is not like it's somebody's entire job and maybe a part of their job is to process these 1,000 invoices. It's saying that it takes a full-time equivalent of time to process up to 1,000 or 1,500 for 27% of businesses. And going higher than that, you see the numbers really dwindle down. So when we think about AP automation, really think about raising the bar in this area. We're seeing customers get to 200,000 invoices per FTE per year. And if you're doing the math, that's about 16 to 17,000 per month. So that's like a 17x change from what we're looking at in these statistics here. And that's one of the things that I get really excited about when we think about an AP automation journey is that people can dedicate that time, that brain power, the hours of human mind to other problems or other strategic solves within the business that otherwise would just be going to these really manual tasks. So I think that's pretty exciting. And also there's like a joy element of this. If people are spending that much time keying in invoices, processing invoices, it's not the most exciting job that they could have necessarily. So what happens when we implement technology to really reduce the amount of time that they need to spend touching those invoices and let them focus on other things?
I couldn't agree more. And I think, part of that is then, the cost, right? And if we can think about those intangible touch points, right, it can be then focusing on relationship building, right? It could be focusing on the supplier relations, the needs of the business. Where are those high value tasks? And what I love about this study is, sitting at the median, 10% is a small number. So 10% is just sitting around $3 to $4 per FTE per invoice cost, right? And if you think about where automation plays, right, it's bringing so much substantial cost savings back to the business. And I think that's one of the things that we see in real time automation. I think it's one of the things that we have as part of our journey is measuring what those are. So I would love to take a deeper diver talk, reiterating and focusing on these trends that we're seeing, but also going into what those core metrics and results are. What are those KPIs to the business? What are the benefits of the cost savings, the fraud protection, which is not something we typically see when we think of fraud in the AP side of it. It's something we're a little bit more focusing on order to cash, right? We're focusing a lot more on the fraud, but I think there's a lot more value that the business can get out of AP automation, which is probably why it's the hottest trending topic right now and why it's being so widely adopted, because with the impacts of the Great Resignation, with the impacts of attrition, there is a shortage of talent in the talent pool itself. And we cannot continue to scale our businesses and our needs in the same respect of getting someone in there to do the invoices, right? It has to be that fulfillment of value. And it has to be about where the business is going. We've become digital in the last, 2 years. Everything has been digital. We've taken all our hard copies. We've transfer them all to the cloud. And this is that next journey, right? And this is advancing that. So just going and focusing a little bit more on the time and cost savings back to the business, focusing on those intangible, before we get to those intangibles, focusing on those tangible parts. I would love for you to kind of walk through some of the benefits that you're seeing.
Yeah, certainly. One thing I'm so glad you brought up, the great resignation and talent and all that. Time and cost savings becomes so important, because even if you wanted to spend over $10 an invoice, even if you had all the money in the world, finding the people to do it and keeping those people engaged and satisfied and excited about their work, that's the other challenge. So I know, all of you finance folks sitting in the room, though, are not excited about the prospect of spending, $10 an invoice just to process it and digitize it and make sure it's accurate. So we want to think about time and cost savings. And this should be a key part of the early conversation with any vendor that you consider to go through the AP automation journey with. So as a customer success leader, I can't help myself but mention that as a key part of onboarding and starting your implementation journey, we come up with like a joint success plan and criteria of what a successful implementation of OpenEnvoy look like for you. What are the key metrics that we need to hit for you to say, wow, this was really wowing me and solving for those key pain points. And so as we go through each of these things, picture yourself working with a vendor and, having these be your key criteria for success, and having a vendor that's partnering with you to make sure that you're reaching these goals. So on the time and cost savings front, I already mentioned the 200,000 invoices per FTE, making sure that you're freeing up to 84% of your AP staff's time. Those two kind of go together well. Reducing the overall. Oh, go ahead, Marie.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to pause. 200,000 invoices is a big increase off that 1,000 to 1,500 metric of where we are manually, right? That is like per month, the 1,000 is so substantial, right? You're talking anywhere from 12,000 to 200,000 capacity increased for the business. Sorry, just hearing those numbers of how drastic, I think like 12,000, 200,000, like, oh my gosh.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where it's really like, you need to raise the bar way, way up from what you're thinking about manually. 200,000 invoices, it's a complete game changer. And we're talking about from the time a vendor sends an invoice into your system to being marked as okay to pay, that, that entire journey is automated except for those exceptions. And just thinking about, like you said, the amount of time that will free up. And then there's cost savings. We often think about this in terms of cost savings for the reduced headcount, the reduced man hours, all of that stuff that I just mentioned. And I'm actually coming to mind, a customer that I worked with recently quoted me that they were spending 800 man hours per month doing their monthly reconciliation, that OpenEnvoy was able to save them. So thinking about, these are large scale changes that software is able to help us make. But in addition to those man hours being saved, there's the wasted spend. There's the cash flow optimization they're able to do. I'll kind of get to that as we dive into the others, but thinking about the fact that controlling when you pay your invoices, because you're not reliant on people manually processing them and hitting backlogs, thinking about catching any wasted spend in terms of those invoices not being 100% accurate. So when we talked about, even those that are at 97% accurate, that 3% on whatever number they're applying that 97% to, that's potentially wasted spend. Because what we see in the space, as I mentioned, is about 36% of invoices are inaccurate once you dive in and start looking at them. And 90% of those inaccuracies are favoring the supplier. And so a lot of companies start off with thinking about, we already look at everything. We know how many errors we have, when in reality, maybe the person on the ground level is so inundated with work, they're so overwhelmed, like they can only spot check. Industry-wide, it's actually about 70% of invoices are audited. not 100%. So when you think about those numbers, there is a lot of wasted spend. And so capturing that wasted spend and getting that's where the 10x ROI can happen. You can't really get 10x ROI just from saving the man hours, but it's from capturing that wasted spend where you can really see amazing return on investment with this software.
What I love is, going to the beginning portion of that, right? Going back to the reconciliation, we as CFOs, we spend so much time thinking about setting strategy, helping the business understanding operations. I think, the last CFO select we talked about was CFO 2.0, right? That you have to understand and work so closely with your COOs to lead the strategy, lead the channels of revenue changing development of the business. And by reducing those times in reconciliation, in accuracy, right? You spend more time focusing on the strategy portion, right? Focusing more time on leading and being that catalyst and voice of change, right? Talking with those stakeholders and guiding where the business is going to go. I think that alone is extremely incredible. And that cost savings between the 200,000 to invoices per FTE is equivalent of 133 people in your AP team, which we don't usually have. We're sitting usually around 20 to 30, 35 tops. So just that alone is increasing the capacity for change. And I think one of the biggest things is then that intangible, the strategy and value led back to the business, but also the employee. To your point, not everyone can audit every single invoice. So you take bulk. We know that. But freeing up all that time and looking at employees and their change mindset and what they need from the business moving forward, it's been proven time and time again that fulfillment in work, pride and being part of the team helps increase the innovation, increase the collaboration, and help the business make bigger transformation changes. So I think by leveraging automation, you can help do that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, the tangibles are how you create your business case and justify bringing in this software, but the intangibles is really what makes the project a success. And I recently spoke with a customer who had been with us for over a year, and the most exciting thing that she said, the thing that made me, love my job, was when she said, myself and my team, we actually want to come to work now. And we were on the verge of burnout, trying to do too much with too little. Now, I have people on my team saying they're having dinner with their family, they're walking their dogs, and they feel like they're able to have more of an impact. Like they're getting the best of both. They're getting their life back to a certain extent, and they're providing more value to the business at the same time. And that's when I was just like, I got chills, just talking about it, because I love, sometimes we think that software is just about numbers and cents, but it's really about how humans interact with the software that gives it value.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's that human interface part. The more they get out of it, the easier it is to use, the quicker it is to implement, and that change management becomes very seamless across the business. I think there's so much on those intangible fronts. If we think about our closes and getting, 2 months to where we want to go, we can probably stay on that topic forever. But I do want to go back to the fraud, because I think fraud protection is a big one, and it's not something we typically, prioritize or focus around the AP automation or being of value coming out of it. So walk us through how is AP automation going to help with the fraud prevention or challenges that we have in our current structures or organizations?
Absolutely. So I'm sure that people in this room are pretty familiar with these first two stats, but nearly 75% of organizations being targets of payments fraud, and 61% of survey respondents saying that AP is the most vulnerable business unit. So knowing that, it's natural. We want to be able to look at and review each one of these invoices and make sure our payments are airtight. With OpenEnvoy, the reason that Gartner recognized OpenEnvoy, when you don't typically think of us as fraud prevention, it's because of that differentiation between intentional and unintentional fraud. So intentional fraud are the things that you think about, people trying to create fake vendors or give fake payment details. There's a lot of vendors in the space that really focus on that. And we have some great partnerships there, but that's not exactly where OpenEnvoy is focused. We are from invoice receipt up to okay to pay. And we're focused on the unintentional fraud. Your vendors, for large enterprise companies, your vendors are working with many subcontractors to actually do the work that you've contracted them for. And they get really large invoices from those subcontractors. And it's really challenging for them to know exactly how to parse those out amongst the customers that they've contracted with. So they're not necessarily, meaning to invoice you incorrectly, but when it comes to, in the freight space, fuel surcharges or accessorial charges, like all of those little extras, document processing fees, like that need to be added on and allocated appropriately, it's not a human scale problem to check all of that stuff, to go back and verify against contracts, against all of that data and information in the system of what actually happened and what should you be billed because of that happening. So that's where OpenEnvoy comes into play, is programmatically solving for that problem and allowing you to get to 100% accuracy. We had a customer that actually would not have uncovered an error over $500,000 just because of the need to kind of manually mash all of this up that they were able to uncover with OpenEnvoy. So I wanted to share that, Marie.
No, I think it's a great opportunity of when we talk about some of that low hanging fruit where those some additional cost savings can be. I think it's also extremely important from a fraud level, in terms of the business and mitigating those risks. To your point, they're not intentional, right? But it does happen. And therefore, I think by providing that layer of overview and leveraging, the tools of AP automation, you can get from a programming standpoint, that accuracy, and then also that additional cost savings. So I think it's another way to add to your business case, right? And I think more so it's about the vendor relationship. And I think, from a vendor relationship management, we spent a lot of time in the last 18 months talking about, well, the supply chain disruption, how is it impacting us? How are we getting the materials we need? How do we have the foresight of what's coming? And how can we respond? Because we do have product teams, we have sales teams, and we need to keep the business going. So how do we leverage AP automation by kind of managing and being a guide to managing those relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where automating your journey can give you so much leverage to build stronger and tighter relationships with your vendors. So like you said, getting those viewpoints by having custom dashboards and a holistic view of what you're spending with vendors, how often you're spending it, how much, how accurate their invoices are, how much they're charging, fuel surcharges or extra accessorial charges, as I mentioned, to track their billing performance over time. That gives you the information that you need to have a really solid contract negotiation with them and kind of understand what the give take is that you need in terms of payment terms, rates to begin with, all of that really key information. I can't tell you how often, people are going into those negotiations pretty blind because they don't have all of their invoice information in one place to actually have that conversation. And then, I already kind of mentioned this in terms of the ROI or potential cost savings. But when you're automating your invoice process, you can control when you pay your vendors. So if you have early pay discounts and that outweighs your need to preserve cash flow, or if you need to preserve cash flow and, pay it right on the due date, whatever makes sense for your business, that part is always going to be truly still a strategic decision. But making sure that you're in control, that you're not being reactive to other people's timelines or manual processing, or this feeling, one of the customers I worked with, the team was always feeling late. They were always getting credit holds or calls from their vendors, all of that challenging stuff that makes their job feel so heightened and stressful and like they're always behind and they can't catch up. Like imagine flipping that on its head and fully feeling like you're in control and you have everything you need to pay those invoices and you can choose when to do it that makes the most sense. And then the last thing here being about not having to beg your vendors to comply with whatever system it is that you're automating. That's a thing of the past. No vendor setup, no needing them to log into a portal or change how they're invoicing you. We had a really, really large company that really tried to do that, and they had a 2% compliance rate. And this is the type of company that you would think would have a lot of leverage over their suppliers, and still only 2% use their requested formatting. So take that away. Don't be in a position where you're, instead of negotiating strategic contracts, you're begging them to comply with, the right format of the invoice. Like, let's turn that on its head. We're not asking for anything from them in terms of how they send the invoices, and we have all the information to negotiate from a place of strength. So I really love the vendor relationship management piece.
And, I think that's so important, all three parts of it, but it's giving control. I think in the last, 2 years, we felt out of control with all the disruption that has happened, and we're still facing those supply chain disruptions. But, having that oversight, having a user interface that works for you, and actually going into those conversations and negotiations, seeing the 360 view of each supplier, seeing what they've done, what they've performed, what they've delivered late, right? That gives you the upper hand in those negotiations, and really empowers you, right? Versus you walk away and sometimes you feel like, oh, could we have gotten more? Or you walk away and then later you find out, wait, they were late 3 times. How could, maybe I need someone else at that point. But I think it's about giving finance the control they need to kind of lead the business and increase those cash flows. It's been we all know cash is king, and cash has been the driver for businesses over the last 2 years, and it continues to be the driver. And having oversight on those cash flows, increasing the efficiency and how you leverage your cash to work for you is so important. And I think having all of these, supports and dashboards change the game when it comes time to having those conversations with the vendors. So, I know we put together this slide of everything, right, of what AP automation can bring. And I think, between the tangibles and intangibles, do share if there's anything, you want to add to this, Samantha.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of wrap things up here, I'll go through these last couple slides really quickly, but this is really what it looks like today. If you don't mind going back to that picture, we've got so many vendors. The invoice information is coming in several different ways, and we've got people in the middle of it all trying to handle those data sources from every different angle. There's fewer and fewer people on your team. The team is feeling, less empowered and just seen as a cost center trying to do more with less. And we can make sense of this with technology. So if we go to the next slide now, we think about the progression that we've had of, first converting paper into data, that being like the hot thing in the 90s, and then trying to look at, okay, where can we find opportunities to optimize with robotic process optimization? And now with the future of finance, it's not just about gathering all of that data into one place, but it's about that real-time machine decisioning, where if we have business rules and repeatable things, or actually the AI can start to pick up on those things on its own, the people on the team are freed up to be focusing on other matters. So we think about the time and cost savings, the stronger protection from fraud, fully managed vendor relationships, being the way that we harness all of that chaos from the prior slide into, this ability for the finance team to go from being a cost center to being thought of as a true strategic partner, an ally to the CEO, and a profit center with all of that ROI that you're able to get on finding the gaps in these invoices. So I had a customer tell me once, finance, when things are going well, everyone's like, what do they do here? And when things are not going well, they're like, what do they do here? And I think that's really changing right now. And this is like an incredible moment for finance, because they are being looked to as that strategic ally. And I'm really excited as we progress further into the future of finance.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. And I think these are some of the conversations that we have planned for tomorrow and later today as well. But, finance is that strategic ally. It's the catalyst within the business. It's leading the transformation. And what better way for that transformation to start internally and within? I think, to your chart of everything going everywhere, right? it's about how do you make it easier? There's so many pain points we feel within finance of like the weight is on the shoulders, or it would be so great if we can do our budget and forecasting, 6 months ahead instead of 2 months ahead. And if we can reduce the time that it took to forecast and plan, we can spend more time on that strategy. And I think by freeing up all this space, freeing up all these FTEs and hours of the business, it's like your tax accountant, right? 80% is focusing on input, 20% saving you taxes. Now flipping it, imagine 80% can be finding you cost savings, value-led, business opportunities, right? What other opportunities are there, and what other opportunities can you see with the data? And maybe there are opportunities for more supplier partnerships, but unless you're having those conversations and unless you're freeing up that space and time for the employees, they can't put their time and invest it there. So I love where finance is going. I love that AP automation is kind of leading it. I do want to thank you, Samantha, for joining us and kind of giving us an overview of what those benefits are and really helping executives build that business case. I am going to ask a question for, since we have a few minutes, for those that are debating, right, low code or need to understand more about, do they do RPA or do they do low code? What are your thoughts? How should they address that when they're trying to figure out their roadmap?
I think when it comes to that kind of stuff, it's just anytime you're making one of these decisions, raising the bar. If you're not going to achieve these types of outcomes or the ROI that we mentioned today, if it's going to be more of a Band-Aid to solve it short term, and you're going to go from 1,000 to 1,500 manually to maybe even doubling that to 3,000, but the potential is to get to 200,000. How much time and aggravation and headache are you investing in that interim rather than embracing, the full future solution is kind of how I would look at it, and really looking at your key metrics and your success criteria for an implementation.
I love that. I couldn't agree more about your key success in areas of metrics. And also, dashboards are dead, right? We don't need portal dashboards for suppliers. We need to make it easier for business to take place and for people to get paid, for us to grow. And I think we're going to see a lot of change in what that end-to-end deployment looks like in the years to come.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you, Samantha, for joining us today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.